Hello, my name is Connor Colburn, and this is my teaching method presentation in fulfillment of the requirements for the class ED 530, Advanced Teaching Methods. I've chosen as my topic the idea of differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction. Now, differentiated instruction is a term that is thrown around quite a bit, mentioned quite often, but is one that rarely gets defined, and a lot of people would just lump it into the category of student-led learning. And while it does probably belong in that category, there's much more to differentiated instruction than just student-led learning. So over the course of this presentation, we want to cover what student-led learning is, or what differentiated instruction is not, and also what it actually is. Now, you can be surprised to find out that you probably use differentiated instruction every day in class. You just don't realize that you do. But let's get into it. Let's first talk about what differentiated instruction is not. What differentiated instruction is not is it's not individual lesson plans. You are not creating separate lesson plans for each individual student tailored to that individual student. That's just not practical. I don't even know if it's possible. In my case, I teach over 500 students. I would never be across 6 different grade levels. So I would never be able to create an individualized lesson plan for each of my students. But differentiated instruction, thankfully, is not an individual lesson plan. It's not chaos and disorder. It's still structured instruction. It still has procedures. You still teach procedures. You still have classroom management theories and practices that are a big part of your instruction time. So it's not chaos and disorder where students are just doing whatever they want because they're learning the way they learn. Thirdly, it's not lowered standards. You're not lowering the bar so that everyone can pass. You're not making the gifted or talented students or more academically minded students have an easier time of it. That's actually the exact opposite of what differentiated instruction is doing. And fourth, and probably most importantly in my mind, differentiated instruction is not special education. There are specific programs in place for special education, and differentiated instruction is not one of them. We often include it in that, but it's a completely different system. Differentiated instruction is not individual lesson plans, it's not chaos and disorder, it's not lowered standards, and it's not special education. So what is it then? What is differentiated instruction? Carol Tomlinson probably has the largest body of writing and research on this topic of differentiated instruction, and much of what I share in this presentation comes from her various books and scholarly papers on the subject. Differentiated instruction is a way for teachers to effectively teach students with various levels of knowledge, skills, or motivation. I'm going to repeat that. Differentiated instruction is a way for teachers to effectively teach students with various levels of knowledge, skills, or motivation. There are 4 areas. My slide says 3 and 3, 2 threes, but it should be a 4. There are 4 areas that differentiated instruction comes into play. The first is content, the content of your instruction. So that would be, for example, using materials at varying reading levels. Not all students are the same. To teach just a set lesson to all your students is really shortchanging some of your students that may not have the ability to keep up with that lesson. So it's using materials at varying reading levels. It's presenting material in a multitude of ways, both auditory, where you're actually saying the material, and also visual means. This is something that, like I said, we use differentiated instruction almost every day. I do this every day. I have slides that go along with each of my lessons. And it's using spelling or vocabulary lists, definitions, glossaries to try and help your students all come to the same level to achieve the same learning objectives. The second area that differentiated instruction is used in his processes. Using tiered activities, we call it scaffolding. And through these activities, all learners work towards the same important understandings and skills, but proceed with different levels of support, challenge, or complexity. One misconception about differentiated instruction is that it's for students who are slow, students who are struggling. Differentiated instruction is also for students who excel, students who are find it academically easy in certain subjects. Both can benefit from differentiated instruction. So the processes you might adjust your processes. Again, not changing the whole lesson plan, but just adjusting the processes, how we get to this point. Some might need more support. Every time you go up to an individual student in your class and say, do you understand? If you see them struggling, you are practicing differentiated instruction. You're giving them a different level of support than you are the student that just sits down, does their work, hands it in, and it's all good. The third area is product. That's giving the students the option of how to express their required learning. We have our learning objectives. I teach science and English primarily. And so, we have specific learning objectives. In science, I'm teaching animal adaptation. And so I gave my students a couple different options. This is how you can show that you understand animal adaptation. Some examples I have on the slide are giving a puppet show, writing a letter, or developing a mural or a poster with labels and information on it. The fourth area is the learning environment. And this is probably the most difficult one, to be honest, and that is making sure there are spaces in the room, places where students can work quietly and without distraction, as well as places that invite student collaboration. Because differentiated instruction can also include pairing up students into small groups, weaker students with stronger students, and giving students more exposure to people who might be able to help them learn as they go, which also, kind of as a side note, that helps us teachers out. So that is what differentiated instruction is. That is the areas that differentiated instruction is used in. Now, what are the benefits of differentiated instruction? Differentiated instruction allows all students at all levels to be engaged and challenged in their educational study. All students at all the levels. That means the students who don't try at all and still get an A, the students who try their hardest and get a C. We want all of our students to be engaged and challenged in their educational study, and also to reach those learning goals. Engaged. Students who are struggling are able to accomplish the learning objectives, while gifted students are engaged in activities that require them to utilize additional skills in the meeting of the learning objectives. Engaged. And challenged. Students are challenged without being discouraged or having to do pointless busy work. There's nothing more frustrating than being given a stack of busy work because you finished your exam or test early. And so those are some of the benefits of differentiated instruction. What are the results? From a study, Mew et al., this is a fairly recent study, looked at the concrete results, we could say. What are the actual results of differentiated instruction using control group and a test group? And differentiated instruction has been shown to have noticeable impacts in several areas of education. We find that there's a noticeable change when using differentiated instruction in cognitive abilities, academic achievement, overall academic achievement, critical thinking skills, letter-word identification, reading comprehension, writing competency, picture vocabulary, student information retention, decoding skills, fluency, interactive reading, mathematical problem solving, psychomotor abilities, motivation. I found this one, attitude towards science, autonomy, and self-actualization. So we can see that the effects, the results of differentiated instruction are pretty wide-ranging, and a lot of them are those higher ordered skills, critical thinking skills, comprehension, fluency, problem solving, psychomotor abilities, autonomy, self-actualization. Those are all skills that are essential for our students to have. Now we can ask the question, so differentiated instruction, it's a fairly new idea, you would think. How widely is it used? And it's, like I said before, it's honestly used by most teachers on a daily basis to some extent in their classroom. Like I said, every time you go up to a student and give them help with a specific problem, you are practicing differentiated instruction to that student. Now, purposeful differentiated instruction is taught to teachers globally. Most education programs teach differentiated instruction as a valid pedagogy. However, implementation varies widely. And that is where we come to the point of challenges in differentiated instruction. Some of the biggest challenges are just time constraints. I don't have time in a 45-minute lesson to spend the time with each individual student addressing their particular challenges. I don't necessarily have time to design lessons that can meet every level of student academically, behaviorally. I can't design a lesson that meets everything. I only have so much time in the week between my lessons. Workload limitations, there's just too many other things that as educators we're required to do. If all I did was teach, I could probably put together some pretty good differentiated instruction lessons. But we have other duties that we do, whether that be a hallway duty, a recess duty, whether that be other activities at school, other classes that we may have, professional development, a master's program. There's lots of workload limitations that we have that present a challenge when we want to implement differentiated instruction into our classes. Class size is another challenge. My classes aren't getting any smaller, it seems. It seems they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that becomes more difficult because giving that level of differentiated instruction to meet the needs of all your students becomes more and more difficult as your class size increases. Student behavior. If you spend most of your class time just putting out fires with students and their behavior, then taking the time to implement that differentiated instruction is going to be quite difficult. Student perceptions is another big challenge. It's hard for a student, especially younger students, to look at someone else and say, well, why did they have to do more work? Or why did they get an seemingly easier time of it than I do? Why do I have to do this? But they only have to do that. And changing those student perceptions and teaching objectives, teaching them that we're all working towards the same objective, are just a few of the challenges facing teachers who seek to implement differentiated instruction in their classroom. In conclusion, differentiated instruction is actually not a new idea. It actually originates in the one-room schoolhouses of the 18th and 19th centuries. My mother-in-law was a one-room schoolroom. Actually, no, her school had two rooms, one for grades 1 through 3, and then one room for grades 3 through 6. She taught 1 through 3, and she had to exercise and use differentiated instruction because you're teaching students that are sometimes 3 years apart developmentally, abilities. Those all factor in to how they had to use differentiated instruction in those one-room schoolhouses. That's really where it started. It's used often unknowingly by most educators on a daily basis. Even if you're not thinking about it, you are unknowingly practicing differentiated instruction even now. Now, purposeful differentiated instruction increases the outcomes in a number of academic, social, and personal or personality areas, and really should be a consideration for all teachers as they plan and prepare for their lessons. I looked at my last 2 or 3 lessons that I prepared for my science classes. I teach grade 2 and 3 science. And I looked at them fairly critically and said, how could I implement differentiated instruction across lessons about animal adaptation, and that was grade 3, and in grade 2, healthy eating. And so I came up with a couple ideas for my healthy eating. I gave students a choice on how they wanted to present their knowledge. They could draw a picture with labels on what a healthy meal was, 3 healthy meals actually, breakfast, lunch, and supper. And then I also gave them the option if they wanted to write and explain what a healthy meal was and why it was healthy. And I differentiated the instruction, so the ones that maybe struggle with the writing part of it, again, we're talking grade 2, fairly young, so that they were able to still show that they have the understanding and able to have the output, meeting the same learning objective, which was to be able to identify healthy food. In my grade 3 class with animal adaptation, I had students either, again, make a poster about animal adaptations. They picked a species of animal, whether that was a fox or a bear or a rabbit or different kinds of owls, and how those owls were adapted to their particular environment. And they could choose whether to write a short essay explaining adaptation, or they could choose to create a poster that showed adaptation, again, giving differentiated options in how they present the product that shows that they have that comprehension, that they've met that learning objective. And so I hope that you'll consider more differentiated instruction in your lessons. It is work, but if you're an educator, you know that education is work, teaching is work. So this just adds a little bit more work, but I think the dividends do pay in students paying attention, in their motivation, their attitude about learning. I think we can really make learning enjoyable for our students while making it challenging still by using differentiated instruction. As I said, I mostly used the works of Carol Tomlinson. She has written a number of books on the subject. These are the references I used for this presentation. I encourage you to look some of them up. Carol Tomlinson's book, I've really enjoyed looking through it and reading them. And so I hope that you learned something. If nothing else, that you realize now that you use differentiated instruction all the time. And I hope that some of this information will be helpful to you as you continue your teaching journey. Thank you so much. Have a blessed day.